It was Thanksgiving night, and I remember the smell of roasted turkey still hanging in the air when my wife, Emily, decided to bury me in front of her entire family. She raised her glass, smiled sweetly, and said, "Here's to my husband, who came from nothing, poor background, poor manners, and somehow ended up here with us." Laughter broke out around the table. Her brother smirked. Her mother nodded with approval. To them, it was a joke. To me, it was a knife. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I stood up, set my napkin down carefully, and walked out the front door into the cold November night. I didn't look back at Emily's shocked face. I didn't look back at her family, who sat frozen between laughter and silence. 4 years of marriage ended right there, not with a fight, not with a scream, but with me leaving in absolute quiet. My name is Daniel Carter, 39 years old. That night, I was just a man who had swallowed one humiliation too many. Emily came from money. Her father was a corporate lawyer. Her mother came from old wealth. I was the outsider, the man who grew up in a trailer park outside Indianapolis, working nights through high school just to help my mom keep the lights on. Emily used to say she admired my grit. She called it resilience. But somewhere along the line, resilience became something she mocked when the right audience was around. I didn't yell at her family. I didn't slam doors or make threats. I went home, packed a single bag, and drove out of that neighborhood for the last time. The silence in the car was heavy, but it wasn't defeat. It was clarity. I wasn't going to live as a punchline. That night, I opened a notebook and wrote 3 things: leave, build, never return. I filed for divorce quietly, quickly. No contest. No arguments over assets. She kept the house. She kept the furniture. I kept my dignity. She tried calling, tried apologizing, but I never answered. I wasn't interested in explanations. Some betrayals don't need words. They reveal everything in the moment they happen. Years passed. I rebuilt from the ground up, just like I always had. Career, reputation, stability. I carved all of it in silence. I never remarried, never reached out, never looked back. Emily faded into memory. A chapter one thought was closed for good. Until one morning, 10 years later, when she walked into my office. She looked different, tired, worn, shadows under her eyes. And next to her stood a little girl, no more than 7, clinging to her hand. Emily's first words were quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the years between us. She said, "Daniel, I need your help." When Emily stood in the doorway of my office, I felt the room tilt. 10 years had passed since I'd last seen her face, but I recognized the look immediately. It wasn't pride. It wasn't control. It was desperation. The little girl at her side clutched her hand tightly, her wide eyes scanning the room like she was searching for safety. I didn't speak. I didn't ask why she was there. I simply motioned for them to sit, and then waited. Silence forces truth, and truth eventually came. Emily said her husband, some wealthy investor she'd married after me, had walked out, leaving her buried in debts she couldn't manage. She said the child, Lily, was hers, and she had nowhere else to go. She spoke quickly, her voice trembling, but I caught every word. She was asking for help. From me. The irony burned. Years ago, she had mocked my background, belittled the very grit that had kept me alive when I had nothing. Now, the same grit was the only thing standing between her and collapse. I studied her carefully, not with anger, but with calculation. She was thinner than I remembered, the confidence gone, her hands fidgeting with her sleeve. She didn't meet my eyes for long. Lily sat quietly, unaware of the storm that brought her here. I leaned back in my chair and said nothing. My silence stretched across the room until it made her shift uncomfortably. People reveal themselves in silence more than in words. And in that moment, I saw her for what she truly was. Not the woman who once had power over me, but a person stripped bare, clutching at the very man she had once humiliated. That night, after they left, I opened a fresh page in my notebook. 3 words again, this time different. Listen, test, decide. I wasn't going to rush. I wasn't going to save her out of reflex. Time had taught me patience, and silence had taught me strength. If I was going to let her back into my world, even for the sake of the child, it would be on my terms. Over the next week, I began watching. I had resources now, contacts, means, influence I'd built over years of relentless work. And what I found was telling. Emily wasn't just in financial trouble. She was drowning. Maxed out credit lines, late mortgage payments, lawsuits circling. The life of privilege she had chosen had rotted from the inside out. I closed the file and sat in the dark. Emily had come to me thinking I was still the man she walked away from. Quiet, invisible, powerless. What she didn't realize was that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means strategy. And this time, I held the ground she was begging to stand on. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I told Emily I'd think about it, and I let her leave with the uncertainty hanging in the air. That uncertainty was intentional. People reveal their true selves when they don't know where they stand. The next morning, I started with small tests. I had one of my assistants call Emily under a different name, offering her a quick loan at a high interest rate. I wanted to see how she reacted under pressure. She accepted immediately, desperate enough to grab at anything without asking the right questions. That told me plenty. Then I had someone run into her at the grocery store. Casual conversation, nothing more. She complained within minutes about her ex-husband, about how unfair life had been, about how she was surrounded by people who didn't understand her struggles. She never mentioned her daughter. That told me even more. Meanwhile, I kept silent. I didn't return her calls, didn't respond to her emails. Each day, she reached out with more urgency. Her words shifted from polite requests to frantic messages. Please, Daniel. I don't have anyone else. The silence forced her to show her real face, stripped of pride. Lily, though, was different. One afternoon, I saw her waiting quietly in my lobby with a book in her hands. She wasn't loud. She wasn't restless. She just sat there, patient, eyes down, small shoulders carrying a weight no child should carry. That image stayed with me longer than anything Emily said. That night, I opened my notebook again and wrote a new sequence. Observe. Separate. Decide. Emily and Lily were two different realities. One I could never trust. The other I couldn't ignore. I began digging deeper into Emily's past 10 years. Her second marriage had ended not just in abandonment, but in scandal. Her husband had been indicted for fraud, leaving her exposed to creditors and lawsuits. The social circles she once worshipped had cut her off. Friends had vanished. What was left was a shell of the woman who once mocked me across a Thanksgiving table. Still, I didn't act. I let the silence press harder. Because silence isn't absence, it's weight. And the longer I withheld answers, the more she crumbled under it. By the end of the second week, Emily showed up at my office again, this time without Lily. Her voice cracked as she begged me to step in, to save her from drowning. But her words weren't about rebuilding, or even surviving. They were about appearances, about clinging to whatever scraps of status she had left. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't here for redemption. She was here for rescue. And there's a difference. I realized quickly that my silence wasn't about Emily anymore. It was about the girl, the one who sat quietly in my lobby with a book, the one who looked at the world like it was heavier than she could carry. Lily had nothing to do with her mother's arrogance, nothing to do with the choices that had led Emily to my office. And yet, she was the one paying the price. I shifted my focus. Quietly, I had someone look into Lily's school records. She was bright, above average in every subject, but attendance had slipped. Teachers noted she often came in tired, withdrawn. That spoke louder than anything Emily had told me. I also checked the financial picture again. The house Emily lived in was days from foreclosure. The car had already been repossessed. Creditors were circling like vultures. Emily wasn't looking for stability. She was looking for a shield. She wanted me to step in and absorb the chaos she had created. I didn't move fast. I never do. Instead, I began testing Lily in small ways. I asked her questions about school, about her favorite books, about what she wanted to be. She spoke softly, cautiously, but her answers were clear. She wanted to be a doctor one day. And in that moment, I knew what was worth protecting. Emily, on the other hand, grew restless with my silence. She came to my office again, her words sharper now. She said I owed her compassion, that I had moved on, while she had suffered. I didn't respond. I let her voice echo against the walls until even she seemed to hear how hollow it sounded. Then I escorted her out without a word. That night, I opened my notebook again. This time I wrote, protect, prepare, position. Emily thought this was still about her. She hadn't realized I was already building a future for the child she had dragged into her storm. I reached out to contacts quietly, an attorney, an accountant, even a school counselor I trusted. I didn't announce my plans, didn't tip my hand. I gathered resources the way I always had, methodically, patiently. By the end of the month, I had everything mapped out. Legal pathways, financial structures, support systems. Not for Emily. For Lily. Emily thought she had come to me for rescue. What she didn't know was that she had delivered someone worth saving. And when the moment came, I would act. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the same silence that had carried me through humiliation, through betrayal, through years of rebuilding. Silence had always been my weapon. Now, it would become Lily's shield. The pressure began to build when Emily realized my silence wasn't weakness, it was distance. She expected me to jump at her plea, to rescue her the way men in her life always had. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing came. She called my office, left voicemails, even showed up unannounced. Each time, I kept my answers short, controlled. The less I said, the more desperate she became. One evening, she cornered me in the parking lot. Her voice shook with anger as she demanded to know why I hadn't helped her yet. She said she deserved better, that she had once chosen me despite my background. I didn't respond. I just locked my car, started the engine, and drove away without a word. Silence can be louder than any argument. Meanwhile, I kept building. Quietly, I arranged a trust fund under Lily's name, something no creditor could touch. I had lawyers begin the groundwork for guardianship. Not full custody yet, but enough to prepare the terrain. I didn't broadcast any of it. I wanted Emily to believe she still had control, while piece by piece, I was dismantling the fragile structure she stood on. The cracks in her life widened. Her home went into foreclosure. Her credit collapsed. Old friends refused her calls. Each loss left her more exposed, and every time she tried to lean on me, I stepped aside. I wasn't her savior. I was her silence, reflecting her own failures back at her. Lily, however, I treated differently. I made sure she had what she needed: school supplies, tutoring, a warm coat for winter, always delivered indirectly, never in ways that drew attention. She didn't know where it all came from, and Emily never connected the dots. That was intentional. My moves weren't for Emily's pride. They were for Lily's survival. By the end of the second month, Emily's tone had changed completely. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw. She sat in my office again, this time with tears in her eyes. She admitted she couldn't manage, that she was terrified of losing her daughter. She begged. But even then, the words weren't about Lily. They were about herself. She wanted her old life back, her status, her comfort. I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch until she broke down, sobbing into her hands. When she left, the room was quiet again, but the path was clear. Emily was collapsing. Lily was watching. And soon, the moment would come when silence would tip from pressure into action. The breaking point arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Emily burst into my office without an appointment, her face pale, her voice strained. She said the bank had taken the house, that she and Lily had been forced into a motel on the edge of town. Her words came fast, tangled, panicked. For the first time since I'd seen her again, there was no pretense left. The mask had fallen completely. I didn't respond with sympathy. I listened in silence, every detail sinking in. When she finally stopped talking, waiting for me to offer her a lifeline, I simply asked, "What about Lily?" Her silence at that question told me everything I needed. That evening, I drove past the motel myself. I saw Lily standing by the window, holding that same book she always carried. The light behind her was dim, the kind of place no child should have to live in. I sat in my car for a long time, watching, planning. Emily thought she was losing status, but Lily was the one losing childhood. The next day, I made my first open move. Not to Emily, but to the school. I arranged through the counselor for Lily to have extended tutoring, hot meals, and transportation. Officially, it was a charitable donation. Unofficially, it was my way of stepping into her world, not through her mother, but around her. Emily noticed the change quickly. She came to my office furious, demanding to know if I was undermining her. She accused me of making her look incapable. I didn't argue. I just sat in silence, letting her anger crash against the walls until it lost force. She stormed out, but the truth was simple. Her anger wasn't about me helping Lily. It was about her losing control. At home that night, I opened my notebook again. I wrote 3 new words: collapse, secure, replace. Emily had already reached the first stage. The second was in progress. The third would come soon enough. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't celebrating. I was waiting, the way I always had, for the exact moment when silence becomes undeniable power. Emily had mocked me once for my poor background. She hadn't realized that the very resilience she ridiculed was the weapon I'd used to dismantle the life she clung to. Now, she was standing on the edge, and Lily was looking for something solid to hold on to. And I was ready to be that ground when the time came. The shift happened quietly, almost invisibly. Lily began to look at me differently. At first, it was small, an extra smile when she passed my office door, a longer pause when I asked about her schoolwork. She started answering more freely, her voice no longer hesitant. The weight she carried seemed lighter in my presence, though I never tried to force her trust. I let it come naturally, in silence. Emily noticed, and it unsettled her. She came to me one afternoon, her words sharp, accusing me of turning her daughter against her. She said Lily talked about me more than about her. I didn't deny it, didn't confirm it. I simply listened until her anger ran out. That silence made her more uneasy than any defense could have. Meanwhile, I kept strengthening Lily's position. Quietly, I ensured her school tuition was paid for years in advance. I arranged mentors, extracurricular programs, all under the guise of anonymous sponsorship. Every door that might have closed for her, I opened, without her mother's knowledge, without her needing to know who stood behind it. At the motel, Emily grew restless. She tried to cling to appearances, dressing in borrowed clothes, pretending in front of strangers that everything was fine. But appearances don't pay bills, and appearances don't feed children. Lily began to see the cracks in her mother's facade. And once a child sees through, trust doesn't return easily. One evening, Lily asked if she could stay longer after visiting my office. Emily tried to protest, but the words carried no weight. Her authority was fading, not because I fought for it, but because silence and consistency were stronger than her chaos. I opened my notebook again that night and wrote 3 words: shift, anchor, remove. The shift had already begun. Lily's trust was moving. I was anchoring her stability piece by piece. And soon, Emily would remove herself, whether she realized it or not. When Emily returned days later, her desperation had grown sharper. She asked again for money, for a way back into the world she had lost. She begged this time, her voice breaking, but still the words weren't about Lily, they were about her. That distinction mattered. It showed me where her priorities truly lay. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just told her one line: your choices brought you here. Then I turned away, leaving the silence to fill the room. Emily had mocked me once in front of her entire family, using my past as her weapon. Now, her own past was the blade cutting her down. And Lily, quietly, was stepping closer to the only ground that hadn't shifted beneath her feet: mine. Emily's grip finally began to slip in ways she could no longer hide. She arrived at my office one morning uninvited, her hair unkempt, her voice frantic. She said Lily wasn't listening to her anymore, that the child preferred my company to hers. Her words weren't measured. They were sharp, trembling with fear. She accused me of poisoning her daughter's mind. I didn't respond. I let her voice fill the air until exhaustion replaced anger. Then I told her calmly, children choose where they feel safe. That sentence hung between us like a blade. She understood it, even if she didn't want to. She stormed out, but the silence that followed told me she knew she was losing. Meanwhile, I kept moving quietly. I expanded the trust fund, added a legal clause tying Lily's guardianship to me if Emily became unfit. My attorney filed the paperwork discreetly, no noise, no attention. Each step tightened the foundation under Lily while loosening Emily's control. At the motel, her desperation deepened. I learned from a contact that she'd been skipping payments, avoiding court notices. She was drowning in her own debts, and creditors were circling closer. But even then, she fought to preserve appearances. She told neighbors she was restructuring, told acquaintances she was considering new ventures. Lies crumbled quickly, though, and soon no one was listening. Lily, however, flourished. At school, her grades rose. She joined extracurricular programs I had quietly funded. Teachers noticed the change, her posture straighter, her voice more confident. When I asked her about her week, her answers grew longer, her eyes brighter. She was stepping out of the shadow her mother had cast. Emily sensed it, and panic replaced pride. She came back again, tears this time, not anger. She begged me not to take her daughter away. She admitted mistakes, admitted arrogance, but even in her confession, the words circled back to herself, her loss, her shame, her fear. Never Lily's needs. That distinction remained sharp. I wrote 3 words in my notebook that night: break, replace, secure. Emily was breaking herself piece by piece. I didn't have to fight her. Her own weight pulled her down. I was already replacing her in the eyes of the only person who mattered. And soon, I would secure what I had been building from the moment she walked into my office. Emily had once mocked my poor background to raise herself higher. Now, she was the one begging at the door, and the silence she once laughed at had become the wall shutting her out. The end came quietly, the way endings often do. No courtroom drama, no shouting matches, no public spectacle. Just a series of silent collapses that left Emily standing alone with nothing to hold on to. The motel finally evicted her. I heard about it before she told me, because the school called. Lily hadn't shown up that morning, and when the counselor checked, she found them sitting in a diner with no place to go. That call reached me, not as an emergency, but as confirmation. The final piece had fallen into place. When Emily appeared in my office later that day, her voice was stripped of everything. No arrogance, no anger, not even pride. She whispered that she couldn't do it anymore. She admitted she had failed. But even then, her words carried the same weight as always, centered on herself. I can't live like this. I can't handle this shame. It was never about Lily. I didn't argue. I didn't lecture. I simply slid a set of documents across the table. Guardianship papers. Not permanent custody yet, but enough to give me authority to make decisions for Lily. I told her it was the only way forward. She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears, but desperation leaves little room for choice. Her hand shook as she signed. That night, Lily slept in a warm bed for the first time in months. My home was quiet, orderly, steady. She ate without rushing, read without fear, and for the first time, I heard her laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was real. And in that sound, I knew the silence had done its work. Emily faded quickly after that. She stopped calling, stopped showing up. I heard through whispers that she had left the city, chasing some faint chance of starting over. But the truth was clear. Her story with me was finished. The woman who once mocked my background, who laughed at my silence, had become a ghost of her own choices. I opened my notebook one last time and wrote 3 words: protect, guide, build. The battle was over, but the work was just beginning. Lily wasn't a project to save. She was a future to guide. I had walked out of a marriage years ago in silence. I had rebuilt in silence. And now, in silence, I had replaced chaos with stability. Emily had tried to define me by what I came from. She never imagined I'd define myself by what I could create. Life settled into a rhythm that winter. Lily adapted faster than I expected. She didn't ask for luxury, didn't demand attention. What she wanted was simple, stability, consistency, a place where the floor didn't shift beneath her feet. And in silence, I gave her that. I never spoke badly about Emily. I didn't have to. Children recognize truth not by what they're told, but by what they see. Lily saw the difference between chaos and order, between promises broken and promises kept. Over time, she stopped asking when her mother would come back. The silence between those unspoken questions carried its own answer. At school, her teachers noticed the change. Her grades rose steadily. Her participation grew stronger. They said she was more confident, more present. That was the proof I needed, not in documents or signatures, but in the way she carried herself, no longer weighed down by fear. I formalized the guardianship in the spring. This time, there was no hesitation. Emily signed away what little remained of her authority. She didn't fight. She didn't argue. She just vanished from the picture, leaving behind the only thing she had ever done right, her daughter. One evening, Lily sat across from me at the dinner table, her book set aside. She asked quietly if I was happy. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. I told her I was content. Not because of revenge, not because of victory, but because of what silence had built, something solid, unshakable. Later that night, I opened my notebook one last time. 3 words filled the page: silence, strength, future. That was the path I had walked, and that was the path I would leave behind for her. Emily once mocked my poor background, turning it into entertainment for her family. She believed silence meant weakness, that my quiet acceptance was proof I didn't belong. She was wrong. Silence isn't surrender. Silence is patience, precision, control. And in the end, it was silence that dismantled her world and built mine. Now, when I walk into my office, people see a man who holds his ground not with noise, but with presence. They don't know the story behind it. They don't need to. The only one who matters is the girl who now walks into school each morning with her head held high. That is the final measure of victory. Not applause, not recognition, not revenge. Just the quiet certainty that I built something lasting where someone else tried to tear me down. And in that silence, I found everything I ever needed. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.